Ladies and gentlemen, silence is not confusion. It's a verdict. When someone goes quiet, they're not thinking it over. They're not too busy. They've already decided where you stand in their life. And the longer you wait for them to speak, the more you're letting their silence make your choices for you. The question is, are you going to keep waiting for words that will never come, or will you start listening to the truth their quiet is already screaming? Silence can be louder than words. It can scream truths you don't want to hear, and yet it whispers them so quietly you have to lean in to catch them. When a man goes quiet, it's tempting to fill the space with excuses. Maybe he's busy, maybe he's stressed, maybe he's just like that. But if you've been paying attention, really paying attention, you'll notice the silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning. And one of the most uncomfortable truths you'll ever face is this. If he's quiet, he's already decided about you. Not always consciously. Sometimes it's not a carefully crafted decision. It's a feeling that's settled in his chest before he even knew how to name it. People act on feelings long before they put them into words. If he has gone quiet, it's because something in him has already landed. He's not weighing the pros and cons anymore. He's not sitting on the fence. His energy has shifted from pursuit to withdrawal, and that shift is almost impossible to reverse, not because you aren't worth it, but because human nature rarely runs back to where it's already decided not to stay. This isn't about punishment, and it's not about you not being enough. It's about recognizing when someone's investment has left the building. It's about acknowledging the signals instead of rewriting them in your head to make yourself feel safe. We live in a world that teaches you to hope until the very last flicker of light is gone. To hope can be a beautiful thing when it fuels your effort in the right direction. But when it's aimed at someone who has already mentally stepped out of the door, it turns from hope into self-delusion. You can hear the difference between someone who's present and someone who's drifting away. Their texts get shorter, the enthusiasm drains from their voice, the conversations that used to be alive with curiosity are now filled with polite updates or recycled phrases. That's not an accident. That's an emotional exit strategy in progress, and it's not your job to block the door and negotiate their return. Your job is to notice the exit signs and decide how you're going to walk out with your dignity intact. When someone is quiet, it doesn't just tell you about their interest, it tells you about their courage. If he's not saying what's on his mind, it may be because he's avoiding the discomfort of telling you the truth. People rarely want to be the bad guy, so instead of clearly stating, "I'm not feeling it anymore," they pull away and hope you'll get the hint. Silence becomes their way of communicating without taking the emotional responsibility for their choice. But here's the shift you need to make. His silence isn't your cue to turn up your volume. It's not your invitation to prove yourself, to chase harder, to reignite something that only works when it's mutual. When someone's energy fades, the instinct to compensate is strong. You start texting more, suggesting plans, doing little things to remind them of what you bring to the table. But all you're really doing is auditioning for a role they've already cast someone else in or decided to cut from the script entirely. Instead, his quiet should be your cue to quiet your own mind, not to match his indifference, but to match his clarity, because his silence is clarity. It's the clearest thing you're going to get from him. And when you stop trying to make noise in a space he's already emptied, you suddenly free yourself from the exhausting job of keeping something alive that he's already let go of. This doesn't mean you walk around cynical, assuming that every dip in communication means someone's lost interest. People have off days, off weeks, life gets heavy. But there's a difference between a temporary silence born from life's chaos and a silence born from emotional disconnection. You can feel the difference in the way they come back or don't. Someone who's still in it, even if they've been distracted, will re-engage with warmth. Someone who's already decided will re-engage with politeness, obligation, or not at all. And that's where the real power lies, not in trying to hold them, but in choosing how quickly you release them. The faster you recognize the truth of their silence, the faster you reclaim your own energy. You stop being the person sitting by the phone, staring at the screen, replaying every conversation in your head. You start being the person who says, "I deserve the kind of presence that doesn't make me question it." Silence, in a way, is a gift. It removes the mask. It tells you more than any long-winded explanation could. You don't have to decode mixed signals because silence is not mixed. It's as clear as it gets. And when you stop trying to argue with it, you can finally step into relationships where interest is obvious, effort is mutual, and communication doesn't have to be dragged out like a reluctant confession. The irony is, when you respond to silence with self-respect, you create a life where silence doesn't scare you anymore. You stop clinging to people who have already emotionally left because you're not afraid of being alone. You're not afraid of creating space for someone who actually wants to fill it. You understand that your value isn't measured by someone's attention span. If he's quiet, it's not your loss, it's his. But more importantly, it's your signal to protect your energy. Because the moment you start interpreting his quiet, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a decision already made, you stop wasting time trying to reopen a door he's locked from the inside. You start looking for the doors that are already open, for the people who don't need convincing, for the relationships that make you feel chosen without having to perform for the part. Your peace comes when you realize that love, at its healthiest, isn't built on guessing games. It's not built on you reading between the lines of someone's disappearing words. It's built on someone showing up and making it known they want to be there. So if he's quiet, let that be the answer. Because deep down, you already know it is. And when you truly let that sink in, something remarkable happens. You start hearing your own voice again. Because his quiet may have been drowning it out. You've been so tuned into what he says, what he doesn't say, how long it takes him to reply, whether the tone in his messages feels the same, that you've neglected to ask yourself the real question. Do I even like how this feels? We can get addicted to the chase without even realizing it. The push and pull dynamic can create a false sense of connection, like you're bonded through the struggle. But think about that for a moment. If the foundation of your connection is uncertainty, mixed signals, and you constantly having to interpret clues like a detective, then it's not a connection, it's a puzzle. And puzzles are designed to be solved, not lived in. When you step back from the noise in your own head, you can see how much of your energy has gone into trying to preserve an image of what you hoped this would be. Maybe you were drawn to him because in the beginning he made you feel special in a way that lit something up inside you. And when that feeling started to fade, you didn't want to lose it. So you told yourself stories like, he's just busy, he's not good with words, he's not ready for something serious yet. But if you're honest, those stories weren't just about explaining his behavior, they were about protecting yourself from the pain of facing the truth. And yet the truth, while painful, is the thing that will set you free, because the truth doesn't just tell you where he stands, it shows you where you need to stand. It forces you to look at yourself and ask, what am I tolerating in the hope that it turns into something else, and why? That's where the growth is. If he's quiet, he's telling you where you stand in his life. And that's not the tragedy it feels like in the moment. It's an invitation to choose where he stands in yours. This is where self-respect shifts from a nice idea to a daily practice. It's not about grand speeches to yourself in the mirror. It's about micro decisions. It's about noticing when you're about to send that follow-up message just to pull him back into conversation and instead putting your phone down. It's about seeing the gap between his last reply and yours growing wider, and resisting the urge to fill it with effort he's not matching. Every time you make those small choices, you build a muscle, and that muscle, the muscle of self-worth, will serve you in every relationship you ever have. Because self-worth doesn't mean you never feel the sting of rejection or the ache of loss. It means you feel it, you acknowledge it, and you refuse to let it dictate your value. It's not your job to convince anyone to see you as worth their attention. That's a job no one is qualified to do, because it puts you in a position where your worth depends on their willingness to validate it. And the moment you give someone else that power, you set yourself up to lose. People are inconsistent. They have moods, distractions, baggage, and blind spots. If your self-esteem hinges on their consistency, you'll be riding an emotional roller coaster with no seatbelt. The most magnetic thing you can do in the face of someone's withdrawal is not to fight for their attention, but to fight for your own peace. That's the kiss. end of energy that pulls the right people toward you, not because it's a tactic, but because it's genuine. When you genuinely believe that your value is not up for negotiation, you stop bargaining for it with people who aren't offering it freely. Silence can be a teacher. It teaches you who can sit with you in the quiet without making you doubt where you stand. It teaches you to stop chasing clarity from people who thrive on being vague. It teaches you to trust your gut when something feels off instead of gaslighting yourself into ignoring it. And maybe deep down you've already known for a while that he's decided, but you've been holding on to that tiny, fragile hope that he'll surprise you, that he'll wake up one morning and realize exactly what he's about to lose. And maybe he will. But here's the question you have to ask yourself. Do you really want to be chosen by someone who had to almost lose you to see your value? Or do you want to be with someone who recognized it from the start, without needing a wake-up call? When you start thinking like that, you stop waiting for someone to come around and start wondering why you were waiting in the first place. You realize that the energy you've been pouring into wondering about him could be spent on building the kind of life that makes you feel full even without anyone's attention. Because when your life feels full, you're far less tempted to shrink yourself just to fit into someone else's inconsistent presence. Here's the truth no one likes to hear. Sometimes the closure you want will never come in words. It will come in the form of their absence, their lack of effort, their silence. And you have to be willing to accept that as enough. Waiting for a perfectly packaged explanation is like waiting for rain in the desert. It might happen, but by the time it does, you'll be too thirsty to care. This isn't about becoming cold or shutting people out. It's about becoming so grounded in who you are that someone else's pullback doesn't knock you off your feet. You stop reacting to every fluctuation in their attention because you know that your center of gravity is inside you, not in them. When you respond to silence with silence, not as punishment but as self-preservation, you send yourself the message that you're listening to your own needs. You're saying, I hear you and I've got you. And that's the relationship that matters most, the one you have with yourself. Because when you trust yourself to walk away from what doesn't serve you, you become unstoppable in finding what does. You can't control whether someone speaks, stays, or steps up, but you can control whether you sit in the quiet they leave behind, hoping they'll fill it, or whether you fill it yourself with a life so rich their absence doesn't echo anymore. The beauty of learning this lesson is that once you've lived it, you'll never be the same. You'll still have moments of doubt, of course. You're human. But you'll recognize the pattern faster. You'll see the warning signs before the silence becomes deafening. And instead of fearing it, you'll thank it for showing you the truth early before you invested more than you could afford to lose. And maybe one day someone will try to give you the same quiet treatment, hoping you'll chase, hoping you'll bend yourself to win them back, but you won't. Because by then you'll know that your worth isn't in the volume of your voice when someone else is silent. It's in the strength of your silence when you've already heard everything you need to hear. And that's when the shift becomes permanent, not because you've become immune to disappointment, but because you've redefined what disappointment means. It's no longer, I wasn't good enough for him. It's, he wasn't right for me. That's a completely different lens. One leaves you stuck in self-blame, spiraling over what you could have done differently. The other frees you to move forward with clarity, knowing that his decision says more about where he's at than about your value. When you reach this place, you start realizing how much you've been over-investing in the wrong direction. You see how you were auditioning for someone who never even showed up for the casting. You recognize the way you bent your boundaries, softened your standards, and ignored your instincts just to keep the possibility alive. And in hindsight, it becomes so obvious that wasn't love, it was negotiation. And real love doesn't require you to constantly negotiate your place in it. There's a quiet kind of power in no longer needing to be chosen by someone who isn't showing up. You don't have to slam the door, make dramatic speeches, or craft perfectly worded messages to make a point. Your absence speaks for itself. You simply redirect your energy toward places where it can actually grow something real. That doesn't just save you time, it saves you from the slow erosion of self-esteem that comes from trying to convince someone to see you. The more you live like this, the more you'll realize how different life feels when you're not in constant pursuit of someone's approval. You stop rearranging your schedule just to be available for a maybe. You stop checking your phone like it's a slot machine that might spit out a win. You stop replaying conversations in your head, searching for the exact sentence where you lost him. That mental space gets reclaimed, and you start using it to feed the things that actually matter: your passions, your health, your friendships, your peace. And here's what's almost ironic. When you stop chasing, you stop attracting the people who expect to be chased. Instead, you start attracting people who value consistency, communication, and mutual effort, because that's the standard you're living by now. You don't have to tell them you expect those things, you embody them. And people who aren't capable of meeting you there will quietly exit your life before they ever have the chance to drain your energy. But there's another layer to this, one that's uncomfortable to admit. Sometimes we hold on to someone's silence because it gives us something safe to obsess over. If we're focused on decoding them, we don't have to face the deeper truth about what we actually need and why we've been avoiding it. His quiet keeps you stuck in a loop where the stakes feel high, but the outcome is predictable. It's familiar, and familiarity can feel safer than the unknown, even when the familiar is painful. Breaking that loop requires courage. Courage to step into the space his silence leaves behind and ask yourself, if I'm not chasing him, what am I chasing? Maybe it's security. Maybe it's validation. Maybe it's the hope of rewriting an old story about being chosen. When you understand that, you start to see that the person you've been running after isn't the solution. They're just the distraction. That's the deeper gift in someone's quiet. It forces you to turn inward. It forces you to build the kind of self-trust that doesn't get shaken by someone else's absence. Because when you trust yourself, you don't need them to reassure you. You already know that if they're meant to be in your life, they'll show up. And if they don't, you'll still be okay. The moment you embrace that mindset, the power dynamic shifts completely. You're no longer the one waiting for a signal to act. You're the one setting the terms. You're the one deciding whether the relationship feels worth your time, whether their actions align with your values, whether the effort is mutual. You're no longer hoping they'll see your worth. You're measuring whether they meet your standards. And in that shift, the fear of losing them fades because you realize you're not actually losing anything. What you're letting go of is the version of the relationship you created in your mind, the version that was fueled more by potential than reality. You stop mourning what could have been because you finally accept what is. And what is someone who has already made their choice with or without saying it out loud. It's a strange relief when you see it clearly. The tension you've been holding in your body begins to dissolve. You start breathing easier. You notice that your thoughts are no longer orbiting around the same what-if questions. You're no longer emotionally budgeting for someone who keeps overdrawing from your account without making deposits. You reclaim the resources, time, energy, emotional bandwidth that you've been investing in someone else's indecision. And here's the thing. Once you've felt the freedom that comes from walking away from someone's quiet, it becomes addictive in the best possible way. You realize that you can apply the same principle everywhere. You stop over-explaining yourself to people who aren't listening. You stop trying to convince friends to treat you the way you treat them. You stop hanging on to opportunities that have clearly passed. You become fluent in letting go. This doesn't make you cold, it makes you clear. Clear about what you will and won't accept. Clear about the fact that your time is valuable. Clear about the fact that the right people won't put you in a position where you have to guess how they feel. And sometimes the greatest act of self-love isn't saying yes to someone who finally speaks up. It's saying no to someone who stayed silent for too long. Not to punish them, but to protect yourself. Because you've learned that silence isn't just the absence of words, it's the absence of alignment. And alignment is non-negotiable if you want something real. When you live from that place, you stop measuring the worth of a connection by its length and start measuring it by its depth. You stop being impressed by grand beginnings and start valuing CD or consistent middles. You stop chasing closure from other people because you've learned how to give it to yourself. And perhaps most importantly, you stop fearing the silence. You start seeing it as a filter, one that screens out anyone who isn't truly committed. Silence no longer leaves you feeling powerless. It leaves you feeling protected. Because now you know when someone goes quiet, it's not your cue to fight harder for their attention. It's your cue to listen to them, yes, but more importantly, to yourself. And when you start listening to yourself with the same intensity you once used to listen for him, you realize you've been speaking all along. You just weren't hearing it. You've been sending yourself signals every time you felt uneasy after waiting hours for a reply. Every time you felt that knot in your stomach when the conversation died without warning. Every time you questioned if you were being too much, when all you were doing was showing up with the openness you hoped would be met. You've been telling yourself the truth in little ways, but when you wanted him more than you wanted clarity, you learned to override that truth. You convinced yourself you were being understanding. You told yourself that patience was a virtue, that people need space, that timing is everything. And while all of those things can be true, they become dangerous when they're used as disguises for denial. Because there's a difference between giving someone space and giving them permission to disappear without consequence. When you finally stop overriding your own instincts, something shifts at the core of who you are. You begin to trust yourself again. That trust is the thing that makes you unshakable, because it means you no longer need a detailed explanation from someone else to validate what you already know. You stop second-guessing every boundary you set. You stop apologizing for expecting reciprocity. You stop offering unlimited chances to someone who's already told you through their cue that they've decided not to take them. And then something else happens. You stop feeling the urgency to get it back when someone's energy changes. You've seen how exhausting it is to try and reverse that tide, how much of yourself it costs to pull someone back to a place they left willingly. You start valuing your time too much to spend it doing CPR on a connection that's been flatlining for weeks. Instead, you save your breath for relationships that breathe on their own. It's tempting to think that if you could just find the perfect thing to say, the right way to phrase it, you could reignite what's fading. But deep down, you already know the truth. If words were enough to keep them, they wouldn't have gone quiet in the first place. People who want to be in your life make sure you know it. They make it known not just in what they say, but in the effort they show. And when you start living by that truth, you stop wasting your best energy on proving what's already clear. The beauty of this shift is that it doesn't just change how you respond to others. It changes how you show up for yourself. You become someone who refuses to leave yourself hanging in limbo. You stop delaying your own joy while you wait for someone else to make up their mind. You start creating moments of happiness that have nothing to do with whether they text, call, or suddenly reappear with an apology. That's when you start to feel something you might not have felt in a long time, lightness. The heaviness that's been sitting on your chest starts to lift. And it's not because you've finally gotten the answer from them, it's because you've given the answer to yourself. You've decided that you don't need their decision to make yours. The moment you live from that place, the game changes. You're no longer reacting to someone's inconsistency. You're acting from your own consistency. You're choose it. Nung you, over and over, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable, because that discomfort is temporary, but the self-respect you build from it is permanent. And the more you practice it, the more you realize how many areas of your life this applies to. It's not just about romance. It's about business deals that stall without explanation. It's about friendships that go one-sided. It's about opportunities that linger in the maybe stage for so long they start to drain you. Once you've learned to see silence as a decision, you stop giving those situations unlimited access to your energy. You decide for yourself when the conversation is over, even if they never say it out loud. There's a certain elegance in that. You don't need to force a dramatic ending. You don't need to storm out or demand closure. You simply recognize that their quiet is enough. And in that recognition, you keep your dignity intact. Because dignity isn't about never getting hurt. It's about refusing to betray yourself in the process. When you live this way, you start seeing people's patterns faster. You see who is showing up and who is fading out, and you make your decisions accordingly. And the incredible thing is, the people who are meant for you, the ones who value and respect your presence, will never let you question where you stand. You won't have to read between the lines or decode their behavior. You won't have to twist yourself into someone smaller or quieter just to hold their attention. It's a kind of peace you can't unknow once you've felt it. And yes, there will still be moments when you're tempted to slip back into old patterns. Moments when the memory of how things were at the start feels so strong it almost convinces you to try again. But the difference now is that you'll pause. You'll remember how it felt to be on the receiving end of that silence, wondering what it meant. You'll remember the mental tug of war between wanting answers and knowing they'd already given them. And you'll choose differently. You'll choose to walk toward the relationships that feel mutual from the beginning. You'll choose the people who communicate even when it's uncomfortable, who don't hide behind quiet when things get real. You'll choose the ones who don't make you guess. And the best part, you'll choose without fear, because you'll know that no matter what, you can handle the truth, even if it's spoken in silence. In that way, his quiet becomes more than a turning point. It becomes a teacher. It teaches you how to value your own voice enough not to chase after someone who refuses to use theirs. It teaches you that sometimes the answer you've been waiting for isn't a sentence, it's a pattern. It teaches you that the real power isn't in holding on, it's in knowing when to let go without resentment. And when you let go from that place, you don't carry bitterness with you. You don't close yourself off to love or connection. You don't become hardened. You simply become wiser. You learn to spot the difference between someone who's busy and someone who's gone, between someone who's thoughtful in their responses and someone who's disengaged, between someone who's worth the wait and someone who's just wasting your time. It's not about being cynical. It's about being awake. And when you're awake, you're no longer fooled by the illusion that their silence is neutral. You know it's charged with meaning. You know it's telling you everything you need to know, whether or not you wanted to hear it. And once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. You don't try to, you take it, you learn from it, and you move forward lighter than before,